Hi guys. Well, this is something that we wanted to do for the kids as Sunday school is starting up again this year. Just a little something extra for the kids. And I'll be honest, if you big kids want to take part in it too, that's okay. But I'm going to be reading a book, chapter by chapter. This is The Exiled Prince by Elizabeth Rice Hanford. It's published by Sword of the Lord Publishing in Tennessee, and they very graciously gave us permission to read it in this manner. So here we go. This will be Chapter 1, Surrender or Die. The first shafts of sunlight crept up over the great city walls of Jerusalem, revealing a young boy slumped across a stone battlement. Weariness had drained his body, but his dark eyes darted back and forth across the valley, piercing the gloom to watch every movement of the enemy. He was a young lad, but he held his bow and arrow ready, like a true soldier of Judah. It was the year 607 before Christ. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had surrounded Jerusalem. His army covered the hills like grasshoppers. It was terrifying to see those unending columns of soldiers riding forward on their fierce horses, their tall spears glinting gold in the early sunlight. The siege had lasted many days, for the walls of Jerusalem were thick and high and strong. But the gates of the city were wood, and if Nebuchadnezzar's men ever got past the arrows of the men on the wall, the city was doomed. And Nebuchadnezzar's army was already famous for its mercilessness. Daniel was depressed. His throat ached from burden. How long could they hold back that terrible army? How long could they fight without any food to eat? City gates, if they were barred to keep out the enemy, could not be opened to bring food in. People were starving. Dead bodies already lay in the streets, and no one had strength to bury them. Soon the soldiers would not be able to fight, and then that wicked army would storm into the helpless city, stabbing, spearing, looting, and burning, and there wasn't a thing Daniel could do to help. He wiped a tear from his face and kept watching. As daylight broadened, men in the Babylonian camp below stirred. Daniel heard a pebble drop, and he whirled sharply. "It's me, Hananiah, Daniel. I'm coming up," a voice whispered in the darkness below, inside the wall. "Watch it, Hananiah. There's an archer over there using this position for his target practice. Keep low." "I will," Hananiah answered. Breathing hard, he crept up beside Daniel. He looked through the embrasure and saw the thousands of soldiers moving into attack position. He whistled in dismay. "The world is full of Babylonian soldiers." "Almost," Daniel agreed. "I wish we could fight them instead of holding up in the city like this. We could rush them at night and kill them before they knew what was happening. Or better yet, get them confused and let them kill each other like Gideon's men did. If Gideon could do it with only 300 soldiers, so could we." He stopped to take a breath. "God was with Gideon," Daniel said sadly. "God isn't with us." Hananiah hung his head. It was true. God had forsaken them. But it wasn't God's fault. They had forsaken God. Even now, at dawn, you could still smell the horrible stench from the valley of Hinnom, although it was on the other side of the city. Last night, like so many nights before, the leaders of Jerusalem had bowed down to the heathen idol Moloch. People who had once worshipped God now sacrificed people to a wicked idol. No wonder God had forsaken Judah. Hananiah shook his head. If only King Jehoiakim would turn back to God. "Jeremiah the prophet keeps trying to reach him. He just won't give up." "Suppose the king of Egypt would come and fight for us?" "Not a chance," Daniel answered. "Nebuchadnezzar has conquered every bit of land from the Euphrates River to the Nile. There'll be no help from the Pharaoh." "Oh, what's the use?" Hananiah burst out. "We may as well die by that soldier's arrow as to stay in this rotting city." "No, Hananiah, don't say that. God will do right. I know he will. I've made up my mind to trust him no matter what. No matter which way things go, I'm going to keep praying and keep fighting. Hananiah looked at Daniel scornfully. You're just a kid, Daniel. What can you do? If the grown-ups are all cowards. Hananiah stopped abruptly, ashamed at the burning look in Daniel's eyes. When I think about it, he mumbled, I guess if God was going to listen to anybody pray, it would be you. Nobody else seems to love him at all. In fact, they blame God for the war, don't they? No matter, Hananiah, we can do what's right. We can serve God. You'll see. A low whistle made the boys turn around. Azariah, careful as you come, Daniel called as his friend scrambled up the wall. Azariah ducked as an arrow sang over his head. Daniel, you and Hananiah are wanted at once in the courtyard of the temple. Us? What do they want us for? Azariah's face was white. The king has surrendered to King Nebuchadnezzar. Surrendered, Hananiah wailed. We'll all be killed. No, King Nebuchadnezzar has promised mercy. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. That could be true. Do you remember the prophet Jeremiah kept telling the king that God wanted him to surrender? Hananiah brightened. I do remember that now. What are the conditions of the surrender, Azariah? Do you know? Yes. He wants a certain number of hostages to take back to Babylon, and the list is already made up. Hostages? What's a hostage? Hananiah asked. People he'll take back to Babylon to make sure King Jehoiakim does what he promises. If King Jehoiakim breaks his promise, Azariah drew his finger across his throat. The hostages lose their heads. Who will be the hostages? Hananiah asked soberly. Azariah's voice trembled. The sons of the princes? Your name is on the list. Mine, Daniel, Mishael. You mean we've got to be held prisoners in Babylon because King Jehoiakim surrendered? Hananiah asked. Azariah nodded, unable to speak. All the way to Babylon. Azariah nodded. Daniel laid down his bow and arrows reluctantly. I've prayed so many times for the end of this war, and now that it's here, I'm scared to death. Me too, Hananiah echoed. But if this is what God wants, then I want it too, Daniel said softly. You must come now. They're waiting for us in the temple courtyard. Hurriedly, their hearts pounding with fear, the three boys scrambled down the wall and raced toward the temple. Captives in Babylon. How would it be? Would they die there? Would wicked King Jehoiakim for once in his life keep a promise? Would they ever see their parents again? Did God really care what happened to them now? That's chapter 1. We'll find out what happens in chapter 2 the next time.